LEGO Batman Legacy of the Dark Knight is the kind of game that immediately makes one thing very clear. TT Games actually cares about Batman. This is a full-on celebration of Batman history. From Adam West to Robert Pattinson, from the movies to the shows, from the games to the comics, and you can feel that affection in almost every detail. Legacy of the Dark Knight works because it understands Batman, but it still has to be judged like a full-priced action game. And that's where I have a controversial opinion. Because yes, this is a LEGO game. Yes, kids are obviously part of that audience. But I don't really like it when people say it's a kid's game as a shield for shallow or outright bad mechanics. The games I grew up with didn't treat kids like they were incapable of learning in-depth gameplay mechanics. They expected you to pay attention, fail a little, figure it out, and keep moving. So when a game has weak combat, weak puzzles, or no real challenge, I don't think, well, children exist, is some magical defense. Kids can handle difficult games much better than people give them credit for. And that was my biggest issue with LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga. That game had a massive amount of hype, it had the scale, it had the presentation, and it sounded like the dream LEGO Star Wars game. But then I played it, and after a while, I just wasn't having fun. It looked good, but the actual playing of it felt shallow. So coming into Legacy of the Dark Knight, I had that concern sitting in the back of my mind. TT Games had the license, the nostalgia, and the budget. The question was whether they had the gameplay to back it up. And thankfully, this one lands a lot better. This isn't LEGO Batman 4, and that was the right call. The older LEGO Batman games had their own distinct identity. They were more so puzzle platformers with combat sprinkled in between. You swapped characters, built objects, broke half the room for studs, solved a simple environmental puzzle, and you moved on. That structure worked, especially in the first two games. I grew up with LEGO Batman 1 and 2, and I still have a lot of affection for them. LEGO Batman 3, however, is the one that barely exists in my memory. I played it, I know I played it, but if you asked me to describe 3 memorable things from it, I'd be fighting for my life. Legacy of the Dark Knight changes the typical LEGO foundation. There is still puzzle solving, there is still platforming, you still break objects, collect studs, use character abilities, and do the normal LEGO activities. But the center of the game is clearly the new combat and stealth mechanics, and the inspiration is obvious. This is TT Games making an Arkham-style LEGO Batman game. The strange part is that this is now the second recent Batman game to understand the Arkham appeal better than the studio that actually made the Arkham games. Batman Arkham Shadow did it in VR, and now LEGO Batman is doing it with plastic minifigures and collectible studs flying everywhere. Meanwhile, Rocksteady went from defining modern superhero combat to becoming the studio everyone points to when talking about generational fall-offs. Apparently, they're course-correcting now, and maybe they can have a comeback with a new Batman game years from now. And I hope they do, but it's still wild that the Batman power fantasy has been kept alive by both VR and now LEGO. The combat here is very clearly Arkham Light. That term has been thrown around a lot, and it's fair. You have the free-flow rhythm, the counters, the attack chains, the enemy types that force different responses, and the general feeling of bouncing around a group of thugs while Batman turns into a very small, very angry pinball. It's still not as smooth as Arkham, it doesn't have the same snap or the same smooth animations, but the basic structure is strong enough that the combat still works extremely well. Playing on the hardest difficulty helped a lot. Shield enemies, stun baton enemies, big heavy enemies, and other variants showed up much more often than on the easier difficulties, and that forced me to actually pay attention instead of just spamming the basic attack until the room was empty. And that's where the combat started to feel familiar. You counter one guy, dodge another, quick use a gadget, and suddenly this LEGO game starts feeling like it has that Arkham rhythm. It's lighter, obviously, but it's not mindless. The gadgets are probably the best part of that system. The Batclaw especially became one of my favorites once upgraded. Being able to yank enemies around, spin them, and slam them into the ground gives combat a little extra personality. Some upgrades reward timing your basic attacks, some make perfect counters hit harder. It's not anything deep, but there's enough here to make progression feel more interactive than gear upgrades, for example. Stealth is where the game takes its hardest hit. The Predator sections have everything you remember. You're grappling up to gargoyles, watching enemies from above, dropping down, using Batman's gadgets, and doing the classic Arkham room clearing routine. That sounds perfect, but in practice, the enemy AI is just too dumb. The detection ranges are so narrow that enemies often feel like they are wearing drunk goggles. Unless you're standing directly in front of them, waving at them, and filling out a formal notice of your location, they usually have no idea what's happening. Predator rooms work when the enemies feel nervous and dangerous enough that your planning matters. In Arkham, even basic thugs could punish sloppy movement if you get careless. Here, the setup is there, but the pressure is missing. I'm glad stealth exists in the game, because Batman without Predator sections would feel incomplete. But when it's this easy, it feels like more of an afterthought than a real test of observation and timing. The character roster is a bit of a mixed bag, some improvements over the older LEGO games, but definitely missed potential as well. Older LEGO games would give you a massive roster, which looked great on the character select screen, but half the characters were basically the same person with a different skin. Here, the roster is smaller, but the characters have a more defined toolkit. It's a smart trade-off. I would rather have fewer characters with actual gameplay differences than 50 characters where most of them exist so the character select screen looks impressive. That said, some overlap is still noticeable. Batman, Robin, Batgirl, and Nightwing all have a battering-style tool, which makes sense for the characters, but when the roster is this small, repeated abilities stand out way more. If you're going to reduce the character count, every character needs to justify their slot mechanically. Give me a Robin that leans harder into tech and traps. Give me a Nightwing that is faster and more agility focused. Give me reasons to swap beyond this character can do the same thing but with a slightly different animation. The open world is closer to Insomniac's Spider-Man than a traditional open world RPG, for example. Gotham is really just a large sandbox for collectibles, random crimes, puzzles, and a few side objectives. That's fine. LEGO games have always been built around that 100% chase. You clear the story, then you come back with more characters and abilities, clean up the map, replay some missions, and slowly turn the entire game into a checklist you are weirdly committed to finishing. Some of the open world content is solid. The Riddler-style puzzles were better than I expected. A lot of them are simple. You just throw the batarang, hit a few objects, open the thing, collect the reward. But a few actually made me stop and think for a minute, which is more than I can say for a lot of side puzzles in bigger, more self-serious games. The problem is that some objectives are pure checklist content. Go here, press interact, collect the thing, move on. I would have liked more actual side quests instead of so many small map chores. It's daunting how many map icons there are at a time. There are some funny side activities though. Placing trackers on zoo animals that escaped into Gotham is such a bizarre Batman task that I have to kind of respect it. There's also Selina missions where you're robbing the Penguin's penthouses. Some of these side content activities overstay their welcome, but it's fine if you enjoy the collect-a-thon aspect of these games. I'll probably still go back to 100% it. The Batmobile is handled much better here than it was in Arkham Knight. That alone deserves applause. There are no endless bat tank sections hijacking the pace. It's mainly another way to move through the map, and that is all it needed to be. Drive around Gotham, hit some races, use it for traversal, then get back to the actual game. Arkham Knight's Batmobile had great handling, but the tank obsession became exhausting. Legacy of the Dark Knight avoids that mistake by not trying to turn Batman into some military contractor. AR missions also return in spirit, with Batmobile races, combat trials, and traversal challenges where you're grappling and gliding through select routes. These aren't the main attraction, but they're fun. They give the mechanics a cleaner space to function outside the story missions and open world clutter. A good traversal race can make you appreciate the flow of grappling across Gotham in a way normal exploration doesn't always highlight. The boss fights are enjoyable enough as level climaxes, but they're not the strongest part of the game either. Most of them work in the moment. You get that spectacle, the character banter, the big boss health bar, and that usual LEGO humor. But very few of them really stuck with me after the credits. I almost prefer the older LEGO boss design, where fights leaned more on puzzle logic than just attacking a large health bar until the game agrees you've won. A good puzzle boss can be simple and still memorable. A spongy boss with a big health bar is rarely ever memorable. The story is where the game's affection for Batman really carries it. Each mission pulling from a different era or corner of Batman media gives the game a strong nostalgic identity. One mission heavily referencing Arkham Asylum down to that iconic chime is exactly the kind of thing that Batman fans are going to point at on the screen.
Oh, Frankie, you really have missed me. How's the wife and the two little Bowles?
Just ignore him, Officer Bowles.
Security alert detected.
The game knows people are coming in with years of Batman memories, and it keeps rewarding that knowledge without requiring it. The humor is also pretty good. It has that classic LEGO style with the stupid jokes, the visual gags, characters constantly undercutting dramatic moments, and a few references clearly aimed at adults. It's not as funny as the LEGO Batman movie, which is still in a league of its own, but enough jokes land to keep you smiling. When there's this many jokes per minute, some are obviously going to miss, but the game rarely becomes annoying, and that's more important than every gag being perfect. Performance for me was pretty solid. I played at 4K medium on a 9070 with FSR enabled, and I was getting over 60 frames in the open world and around 100 during the linear levels. That's a pretty good showing, especially for a game with this much happening on screen. I did run into bugs though. I had an invisible enemy at one point. I had another bug where the whole level would detect me if just one enemy did. I also had at least one hard crash. Nothing that ruined the experience, but enough to mention. The main story can take around 12 to 15 hours, and with side content, it can easily stretch closer to 15 or 20. Some people are going to look at that and say a $70 game should be longer, and I understand that argument, but I don't fully agree with it either. I would much rather pay for a focused 15-hour game that keeps moving than an 100-hour game where 70 of those hours feel like chores wearing a content hat. Legacy of the Dark Knight is well paced. The story doesn't drag much, and most levels know when to end. The prologue is the exception. It goes a little too long. I understand why it had to, because teaching kids the Arkham-inspired combat system, the stealth mechanics, the gadgets, that co-op interactions all at once, it's not simple. But you do feel the tutorial holding your hand a little bit longer than it needs to. Once the game starts to open up and trust you more, it becomes much better. The biggest missing feature is the online co-op. That one's hard to defend. Couch co-op being here is great. I am glad TT Games didn't abandon it, because usually local co-op is the first thing that modern games throw into the garbage. But no online co-op in 2026 in a game that is built around co-op play, that's rough. Every level gives you an AI companion, and that AI companion is competent enough, and it never really got in my way, but this game clearly should have supported playing through the campaign online with a friend. Another strange omission is True Hero being absent here. In the older LEGO games, collecting enough studs in a level gave you that True Hero status, and chasing that across every mission added replay value. It was simple, but it worked. Here, with every mission being replayable from the back computer, bringing that system back would have been an easy way to make replaying levels feel more rewarding. Leaving it out just feels unnecessary. I'm also curious where TT Games goes after this. They have now done the big AAA LEGO Star Wars game, and now the big LEGO Batman game. Looking back at their old catalog, LEGO Indiana Jones would seem like the obvious next revival, but I don't know if that's going to happen. Indiana Jones is not the powerhouse IP it used to be, unfortunately. Batman still had that cultural weight and plenty of demand. He's just easier to sell at the end of the day. The future of LEGO Batman also depends on what Rocksteady does. Legacy of the Dark Knight benefits from the Arkham gap. It fills a space that has been empty for a long time. If Rocksteady comes back with a strong, proper Batman game, then a LEGO Arkham-style game might not feel as exciting next time. But that's a good problem to have for Batman fans. After years of waiting, I would rather have too many good Batman games than whatever the hell the Suicide Squad game was. I would recommend Legacy of the Dark Knight, but with a clear warning. If you only want a true Arkham successor, you may be disappointed. The combat is lighter, the stealth is weaker, and the challenge ceiling is lower. But if you like Arkham and you also have affection for LEGO Batman's puzzle platforming, the collectibles, its humor, and a co-op structure, this game hits a very specific sweet spot. It's not perfect, the stealth needs work, the bosses could be more memorable, the open world content gets very checklist heavy, and online co-op should be here. But the game has a clear love for Batman, a stronger gameplay foundation than I expected, and enough smart references and mechanical variety to keep the whole thing moving. That's why I came away positive. Legacy of the Dark Knight does not replace Arkham, and it doesn't need to. It takes that combat language, filters it through LEGO structure, and gives Batman fans a game that actually respects the character's history. After the last decade of superhero games being so uneven, this one was a breath of fresh air. Anyways, that's all from me. Let me know if you guys are playing Legacy of the Dark Knight, and I'll catch you in the next one. See ya.